Look, Gary, I'm going to start with you, and I want you to comment on what you've just heard from BVR and the opportunity and the fact that we don't need to worry in light of recent trips to the US and Egypt and elsewhere. What do you think?
Well, firstly, good morning. Thank you to the Lord Mayor, who sort of briefly left us, for hosting us. This is a meaty, substantive topic to be discussing on day 2 of UK-India Week and the India Global Forum. I think I was intrigued by the line of questioning you were going down, and I think Mr. Subramaniam's answer was absolutely correct. The scale of the India infrastructure opportunity, and you heard various data points this morning also from the High Commissioner. But the one that sticks in my mind, the way I look at this, is the national infrastructure pipeline that was announced a few years ago of the 9,000 projects was around, at that time, 1.4 trillion. It may have gone up or down, but it's roughly 300 billion a year. If you look at the Indian government's allocation, which has been going up in the last several budgets, and most recently, it's going up by sort of 30% each year almost. It is now at around 120, 130 billion, about over 3% of India's GDP. That basically means that you've got about 180 billion of funding gap.
Yep.
And therefore, he's absolutely correct. There is plenty for everybody to go at here. And I think the trick here is going to be, if you look at the mix of that, it's roughly a quarter of it is power, about a fifth, about 20% almost, is roads, and about 15% each is urban infrastructure and railways. If you look at the private sector component of each of these, it's higher in some and less in others. So, for example, and we were having a conversation over dinner yesterday, in airports or even power, you can get 70, 80% private sector involvement. In airports, roads, it may be 50%. But when you get down to railways, it's small.
So, but why do you think it's not happening quickly enough now?
Look, I think we need to, if you look at it, sort of, where do you get the most inward investment flow into any situation, into any economy? It's when you have transparency, consistency, predictability, and accountability of policy.
Yep.
And that framework is key in order to improve returns and reduce risk. Because as an asset class, infrastructure is all about the predictability of the returns, or reducing the volatility of the returns around it. And that is absolutely key in my view. And it's important because also it's one of the, if you like, monetary ways of improving your inward investment flows.
Redeemer, with that in mind, where is the opportunity for you, for Brookfield? Give us an insight into what you've done, what you're working on, what you're looking at. And when it comes to the challenges, how optimistic are you these can be overcome quickly enough?
I'll pick up on that quick point, and thank you, Lord Mayor, and everyone for having me, and it's great to be here. The time and the urgency of it is important because I'll quickly walk you through some unpleasant arithmetic. We have about 6 years until we'll exhaust our current carbon budget, which is limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees at a 50% chance. We are currently on track to hit that very soon and to exhaust it. And that budget has halved in the last 3 years at the current rate of emissions. Now, when you think about that, it's unpleasant to hear. But as an investor, the way you flip that into a pleasant arithmetic is you think about the opportunity. And the opportunity, talking about India, is forecasted to be about the opportunity to create 200 gigatons of carbon space for the world, which is in effect almost the entire carbon budget that we have available. So when you think about it as an investor, you place it into context around what are India's emissions today? It's 2.9 gigatons in 2019. 70% of those come from 6 sectors: power, automotive, aviation, shipping, steel, and agriculture. That is the opportunity. And the opportunity is around identifying how do you decarbonize all of those sectors. So just to put some numbers around this, I was in Paris last week, and for the first time, the global community came together to talk about the climate finance needs of the global transition. And we all know that for the first time, more for dollar by dollar is being invested in renewable energy than on fossil fuels, according to the IEA. Not enough of that is necessarily going to where the emissions are, and the emissions are in the developing world, in countries like India. So as an investor and as Brookfield, I think it's important to realize that we have to go where the emissions are. We have to think about it as a transition, and we have to put capital to work in all of these sectors of the economy. And identifying that delta is important because there is a tendency over the last couple of years, driven by various different policies and regulatory incentives, to try and focus on the greenest of the green parts of the economy. And but there are 50 shades of green, right? You have to think about it in terms of the entire spectrum of where the industries are today and where you want them to be. And the needs are immense. I mean, by 2030, 80 billion is the potential market size of the low carbon energy technologies in India. Currently, the needs of India are 160 billion on an average for the energy economy per year between now and 2030, 3 times of what's the current level. So as an investor, that's an opportunity, and the opportunity lies around all of those sectors that I just mentioned.
So, but is Brookfield taking that opportunity?
We're actively looking at those opportunities. We've invested in several renewable platforms. We've invested in Nevada Group, which is going to be looking at expanding production of green ammonia, which is looking at manufacturing of solar panels. We've invested in CleanMax, which is a distributed renewable energy company for commercial and industrial customers. So we're really thinking about it as a funnel, not just the greenest of the green.
Okay, and we'll come back to specifics as well. Lord Lister, I guess with the advisory hat on, the HSBC advisory hat on, what are the conditions you look for when making investments like these, the infrastructure investments in countries like India?
Well, firstly, I mean, India's great advantage is, I think it's the 3rd largest market in the world for development at the moment. So that alone makes it an exciting place. A lot of that is very sustainable development, so that makes it a little bit easier to finance because it has, and it can clearly be seen to be sustainable. A lot of it's in the transport and urban areas, which are, again, areas which we're interested in. The issues for us are always going to be about risk, and it's always about how we share that risk. So that's key for us. We work very closely with MDBs in trying to work that out. It's about how we structure it, how do we get the first, particularly on riskier projects, how do we get first risk covered, and by whom and how. And it's always worth remembering that most big operations will involve syndication over a number of people. So it's not just one organization. So the big word is quite honestly confidence. If everybody is confident, if everybody can see the risk profile, then it all starts to look good, and you can raise the money and you can move things forward. It's about getting all those ducks in a row. Now for us, for HSBC, it's one of our biggest markets. We've got over 45,000 people in India. So we are firmly in the country in every sense. And we are firm believers that the country has got such enormous potential. It is so exciting. There is so much to do. But, and here's the but, always, and it's always about infrastructure, is what are the time delays? It's worth remembering, and this isn't an India statistic, but it is a very general statistic for emerging markets, is that most major projects run about 15 years late, and they cost about 5%. in the planning stage because of that. Now, those sort of numbers do affect the viability of projects.
Yeah. With risk in mind and in the issue of delays of these projects, how do you take all that into account now when you're making your investment decisions? And how has your process changed, if you like, now that you feel you perhaps need to take on a little bit more risk? You need to get these projects done, given the urgency that you laid out.
I think financial innovation is the key. You can't expect to, and building that trust in those relationships is important. You can't expect to sort of go in and over the next 5 years accomplish what Brookfield has accomplished. It's a long-term play, and we're committed to the country and have been, and we're one of the largest foreign investors in the country. And so if you think about it, when you think about the risk-return profile, you have to think about the enabling environment, you have to think about the regulatory certainty, and I have to say that certainly on things like renewables, there is that from the government. There is very clear clarity on what are the goals, where do we want to be, and that gives confidence to investors like us of, okay, this is, we have stability, and this is how we can think about it when we underwrite or structure investments. And so having that certainty is really important. And then the second piece is, as I mentioned, building those relationships and trust. I think trust, in fact, is the key currency for the climate transition, not capital, I would argue.
Yeah. Okay, Lord Geria, one of the reasons I went with BVR, went a little bit down that FTA route and the US question route, is investors also need to have confidence in the relationship between the two governments, between India and the UK in this case. How confident are you in that relationship? How confident are you this FTA can get sorted? How confident are you both sides do want it equally? How confident are you that the investment issues, provisions bit can get sorted? The Brookfields of the world need to see that confidence, need to see that stability.
So look, we've had a 2030 roadmap in place for the last couple of years. Part of that was an ambition around an FTA. It's gone through its 10th round of negotiations. As per some of the remarks made yesterday at the opening of the India Global Forum, it's now a matter also of political will on both sides, and also a matter of taking advantage of a natural window, which is somewhere between, we used to have Eddie's old boss, Boris, used to say a deal by Diwali. He didn't say which Diwali. I think it may be Diwali 2023.
It certainly wasn't. but look, you get my point.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, look, I think on the India side, interestingly, I'm a great follower of Warren Buffett, and if you've ever read his investment letters, he's always talked about the American tailwind. And I think it's undoubted that India has a tailwind, whether it's a sort of combination of economics, demographics, and policy choices. And, they have at least the political, looks like the political stability on their side. I think they're, in a way, I would say to Mr. Subramaniam, I think it would be great if, given his talents, whether the Niti Aayog can move from a think tank to more of a do tank, because I think delivery is the name of the game now in India. We all know the opportunity, we all know the potential. It really is a matter of actually now delivering. On the UK side, I think, what was interesting yesterday in the opening remarks of Sir Keir Starmer was, I would say a very important signal that, and he made specifically referred to the FTA, that he and the Labour Party also wanted that to happen. So I think that symmetry on both sides, I think we do actually have a situation where I think there is cross-party or whatever, certainly on our side, and there is a desire to do this, and it's in our hands.
Okay, and look, I'm glad you mentioned Keir Starmer, because I would probably be accused of being cynical if I brought this up. How notable was it that Keir Starmer opened this yesterday and not the government?
Well, I think the India Global Forum is a non-political sort of umbrella that brings everyone together. I think Manoj Ladwa, who's sitting here, the audience, opened it by saying that, yesterday at the opening was the United Nations of UK-India bilateral partnership, although he did preface it or then say that this is the one table where India has a permanent seat, unlike the United Nations Security Council. But look, I think the fact that Sir Keir Starmer chose to make an important intervention on this topic, I think is good news for, I think, certainly from the UK side, in showing that actually whatever electoral outcomes of the future, actually the India relationship is very strategic.
I'll get back to some of the investment specifics in a sec, but Lord Lister, your thoughts on that relationship context and the importance of that.
Well, I think it is, I agree with everything that's just been said, and I think it is important because there was and has been a rerunning of the Brexit arguments time and time again within Parliament, and it's quite important now that all the political leadership now clearly accepts that we are where we are and the future lies in the Indo-Pacific region. That is why there is a government policy paper on that. That's why there's a tilt in that direction. And there's all sorts of very practical reasons. The simplest one of all is it's young populations, growing populations, massive resources, massive innovation, all of those, while we have here in the West a steadily older population. So the future has to lie in that direction. Now I think that the issue is how can we jump on that bandwagon? How can we make sure British companies seize those opportunities? And it's really important for business to see both the political parties singing from the same tune on this, because that gives confidence. And at the end of the day, particularly, by the way, on infrastructure, which we want to get back to that at some point, but on infrastructure, you want cross-party political support. If you've got that, then those schemes have a chance of success. If it looks as though it's one way or the other, it's hard.
Really, you've given us a little bit of an insight into investments, but which areas would you say excite you most now at Brookfield in terms of where your money's going to go, and how confident are you that some of these issues, these hurdles, these obstacles that we talk about, these challenges, are now slowly being broken down?
I think so. I have a particular bias towards the energy transition because I think it is going to be the secular theme that's going to define, capital markets, and we have to make sure that as the private sector community, we're working with India in partnership very closely to support that transition in an orderly fashion, if I may say so. So I think, from a Brookfield perspective, obviously we have a very large portfolio of investments. We're a global energy super major as well. But the energy transition is one theme that we're very excited about. And so the Global Transition Fund, which is the largest private fund committed to the transition to net zero in the world, and helping advance that, we've almost entirely fully deployed that, and we're now thinking about what's next and how do we continue to build up our presence in India on that theme.
Fully deployed, but how much of that is in India? How much of that is invested in India?
A good portion of it is in India. Of course, I can't share specific numbers, but we have, as I mentioned, investments in Avada Group. We have investments in CleanMax. We have an entire portfolio of renewables operation over there, and we're actually very actively looking at other decarbonization technologies as well.
And outside that space, that sustainability, that renewable space, decarbonization space, what interests you?
So obviously, we have a very large, one of the largest real estate portfolios. So that's sort of said, and I don't need to repeat that. We're looking at the large, hard infrastructure around mobility as well.
We talked about cities and and planning, and the technology piece versus the physical piece.
Yes.
Give us your thoughts on that.
I think the digital public infrastructure, if you will, using the government's terminology, is very exciting. I think we're closely tracking that. But when it comes to the tangibles and the hard infrastructure, I think that's a lot of the bread and butter, and we're continuing to think about the opportunity set in urban areas, the planning around cities, highways, toll roads, all of those continues to be a focus. So we're not going, we're only going forward and faster.
Yeah, and Lord Gario, one of the issues I mentioned with BVR was the land reform piece. Because there was clearly ongoing concern about that. How concerned should investors be by that?
Well, look, it has been one of the sort of persistent issues alongside things like environmental permits and other things. Just wanted to make maybe a couple of points just to build on what we've talked about. There is a sense that if only we could get the right investors with the right risk appetite to be patient capital around infrastructure, because it's long-term assets and this is what it requires. I think that's a little bit of a misunderstanding of how the investment process works and how investors work, right? And in the UK, we have, I think, something over 11 trillion of assets being managed here. The risk appetite among those investors is a massive spectrum. And in infrastructure, it's a relay race. It's not a one-shot rifle shot, right? So even Brookfield, another thing that you invested in India, as you'll know, is telecom towers or gas pipelines. A lot of these assets where you have development risk, there is one type of investor, and that investor will then effectively, once the development risk has come down, they've earned their return, will then transfer onto somebody looking for yield, right? And therefore, the velocity of capital is also important. And I think the Indian government has also recognized this. It has a number of initiatives around particularly the infrastructure investment REITs effectively, and REITs themselves, and a national monetization program where effectively you're churning the capital, but you're also using the right investors with the right risk appetite for the right segment of a project life. And I think that is quite important to understand, because that's how you genuinely sort of crowd in the right types of private capital.
Yeah, good, okay, thank you. Look, I've got a wary eye on the time, and I do have to keep us on time, so I'd like to get a final comment from each of you. And I guess the question is this: when Nitya, the CEO of Nitya, heads back to India and makes the recommendations or this ideation idea. What do you think he's going to say, Lord Lister? First, what would you like him to say? Is it recommendations on how these hurdles might be addressed, or do you think there will be firm commitments that he will go back with, or he should go back with?
I think the thing I would like to hear more than anything else is confidence, because confidence is the key to all of this. Yes, there are lots of barriers which need to be knocked down. But it's the confidence part that we want reassurance about. If you've got confidence, then you can start seeing the barriers come down, then you can see the risk profile, then we're off and running.
Let me get that straight. So you're talking about the confidence in the UK investor in these projects?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's the message you want him to take back. What about you, Lord Kelly?
I sat in Mansion House and I promised everyone that we're going to have investment treaty as part of the FTA framework, and there was a massive round of applause from this room.
Okay. And Ridhima, finally to you. I mean, we talked about this mechanism, which I guess is the seed of something that could move this process along. What do you want that message to be?
I'll add two more C's to that. I'd say clarity and consistency. In order for investors to continue to think of India as the long-term trusted partner for development. Okay, good. We're pretty much out of time, I've got to say. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Ridhima Yadav, Lord Garia, Lord Lister, many, many thanks. Thank you. Thank you.